Loose titles, ill-defined narration, and accusations lacking evidence. This is, in one sentence, the summary of the new but old Western media frenzy against the Islamic Republic of Iran in an attempt to push yet again for the same regime change tactics. Get this. Many pro-color revolution Western websites published this part of the news narrative. Mahsa Amini died after falling into a coma following her arrest by the morality police in Tehran because of her inappropriate dress. But hold on a second. Did the Iranian young woman die the moment the police arrested her? Or was she in shock after being arrested by the police for a felony she had committed according to Iranian law, but having been suffering from chronic disease her entire life, which led to her tragically passing away? The news did not mention that Amini was subjected to any torture. How did she pass away then? A day after Amini's death, Iranian police released a video captured by a CCTV camera documenting the young woman's last moments inside the police station. The footage proves that Mahsa Amini, 22, was not subjected to any violence or physical abuse. The clip shows the Iranian young woman inside the morality police station as she was standing next to a bench, talking to another woman. Then suddenly grabbing her head, crashing into a bench, and falling to the ground. At the end of the video, she was taken on a stretcher to the ambulance and from there to the hospital. Iranian police said that Amini suddenly suffered from heart failure in the presence of other people and was immediately taken to the hospital in an emergency situation for treatment, but she sadly did not make it. In addition to the rumors and conflicting narratives that spread after this politically appetizing issue, as some activists called it, a series of global condemnations and denunciations began. The White House said Amini's death was a flagrant and appalling violation of human rights, and the United Nations expressed their usual concern. The European Union considered that what happened to the Iranian girl was unacceptable, while France considered Amini's death shocking. Within hours, news websites and social media platforms were filled with articles, blogs, and TV episodes discussing Mahsa Amini's death, as well as video analysis explaining how she died, directing public opinion against Iran, pushing direct incitement, clear mobilization, and discussion of public and individual freedoms in Tehran. Mind you, the United States of America incarcerates far more of its population per capita than any other country in the world. The UK incarcerates journalist and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and prepares to extradite him to the US straight to the hands of the CIA. And the French Senate passed an amendment last year that bans girls under 18 from wearing the hijab in public, prevents mothers from wearing hijabs on their children's school trips, and bans the burkini, a full-body swimsuit. But hold your horses. The UN is worried about women's rights in the Islamic Republic of Iran. Welcome to the Mideast Stream. I'm Marwa Osman. The tragic death of the Iranian young woman Mahsa Amini turned into a fake news bomb that perfectly fits for the bright headlines of the Western mainstream media. A quick scroll through Google search engine, it becomes clear how the media dealt with the death of the Iranian young woman. Loose titles, ill-defined narration, and accusations lacking evidence. In addition to the rumors and conflicting narratives that spread after this politically appetizing issue, typically a series of global condemnations and denunciations began, starting with the blatant hypocrisy of Washington to always so concerned UN, who happens to have never showed any concern for the millions of Iranians suffering from Washington's illegal unilateral punitive measures. To discuss this issue with us from Washington is Jesse Zurwell, writer, editor, researcher, and producer and host at TNT Radio. Thank you for being with us, Jesse. Now, rioters during the recent wave of violence on the streets of several Iranian provinces not only disrupted public security and trashed their own cities, they went as far as terrorism, cutting and slitting the throats of security officers, of Iranian police officers who tried to retain safety and security to the streets of their country. How far do you think this very suspicious wave of violence is going to go in Iran?
It's hard to say how far it will go, but I think it will go as far as those who are responsible for this chaos want it to go, unless and until the authorities in Iran put a stop to it, which they've been trying to do since the very beginning. And as you said, they've met with outright violence from vandalism and fires and actual rioting to the cutting of throats of police officers or law enforcement, which is not something that one would typically associate with Iranians who care about their country, who care about the rule of law. What is happening has all the hallmarks of a color revolution in service of regime change. And though we don't know for sure who is behind this, we can make some very good guesses as to who is responsible. And as we know from past experiences, they will stop at nothing unless they are stopped or they achieve their aims. I don't think they will achieve their aims, as has been the case in the past. But again, they will take this as far as they feel necessary to take it, unless and until they are stopped by Iranian authorities.
Well, Jesse, it's not new nor surprising to actually see how Western mainstream media is taking advantage of the recent situation in Iran, claiming all sorts of humanitarian violations while they persecute their own people at home against free speech, to say the least, and while they take part in normalizing the West's brutal unilateral punitive measures against Iran and against other countries as well. And they do that without even flinching. They don't care. But what I want to know is, are there any real ripples inside the U.S. Society, at the public level, concerning this new wave of attack against Iran? Are the public really believing what their regime is trying to portray of the Iranian state?
I'm sad to say that at the public level here in the U.S., it's barely making an impact, if any impact at all. Most people are not aware of what's happening in Iran right now, and if they are, they're not paying attention very closely to it outside of what's being spewed by the likes of the corporate media likes of CNN and Fox News, which has been ad nauseum to suggest, to declare that the Iranian state is carrying out violence against its citizens, that the Iranian state murdered the young woman in question when there's clear evidence that that is not what happened. The situation in Europe as opposed to the US there seems to be a bit more awareness. There seems to be more propaganda in public, and a public that is willing to fall for the propaganda. But here in the US, it comes primarily through corporate media, and people, if they care at all, pay attention just to what is told to them by corporate media and do no more research than that.
How do people like you, Jesse, get to know what is going on, and where do you get your news from?
Well, speaking for myself, I go to Iranian sources, I go to Press TV, of course, and I go to various independent media sources that actually are paying attention to what's happening in Iran and paying attention to it in a way that is not just regurgitating state propaganda. That said, it's still difficult to get an exact picture as to what's going on, but if you pay attention to corporate media, you're getting a very distorted, I would say completely inaccurate picture of what's going on.
What we saw, and we are still seeing in Iran at maybe a lower pace than what happened during the past few days, is a page from the Color Revolution Manual 101 that we have seen for the past at least 15 years, from riots to violence against security personnel to killing civilians and claiming that the authorities actually did it. This is exactly what we saw in Dar'a in Syria in 2011, and before that in Ukraine and in Georgia. But with all that is going on right now with the world, and we are literally 2 steps behind World War III. What good does the US really think it can get from instigating such an unrest, knowing that Iran is not Syria?
I don't know. Iran, the U.S. is certainly playing with fire with regard to Iran. It's not in an economic position to be waging such warfare, really, against Iran, economic warfare and regime change warfare. And perhaps this is at the behest of Israel. We certainly need to ask that question, and we need to ask to what extent the EU and UK are involved in this. It seems, well, it's very, very suspicious that this comes right after Iran was formally welcomed into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and it comes at a time when the president of Iran is speaking before the UN General Assembly. Certainly, Iran is making moves on the world stage to try to benefit itself. And since the revolution in 1979, the U.S. and the broader West has stood completely against any sort of self-determination on the part of Iran. So it seems to me that what the U.S. is trying to do here is what it's always been trying to do, though it's certainly upped the game. It's using more intense tactics than it has in the past, but it seems unlikely to succeed because Iran knows how to deal with this sort of chaos, this provocation, but time will tell. Time will certainly tell.
They have been through this before, but they were able to bypass all of the attempts by the U.S. to wreak havoc and disturb the security in Tehran and elsewhere in other provinces as well in Iran. Thank you very much, Jesse Zorwal, writer, editor, researcher, and producer and host at TNT Radio, for being with us and for your contribution. Now, please stay tuned, because next we will talk about something that the mainstream media did not mention. They ignored the U.S. occupation's killing of a young Iraqi teenager. Now, in Iraq, a teenage girl named Zainab Isam al-Khazali was killed because of a stray bullet from an American occupation base situated inside Baghdad's international airport. It's not enough that the Americans are illegally residing as a form of occupation inside the international airport of a supposedly sovereign state, yet they blatantly use live ammo while fully aware that the airport is encircled by civilian residential neighborhoods, leading to the murder of a young Iraqi teenager named Zainab al-Khazali. Iraqis are infuriated by the crime. They demanded their authorities to investigate the cowardly incident that affected all families in the village of Abu Alwan in the Abu Ghraib area amid a total media blackout. U.S. occupation kills Iraqi teenager in this following report. The killing of the 15-year-old girl Zainab Isam al-Khazali in the Abu Ghraib area west of the capital Baghdad by an alleged stray bullet sparked a wave of anger on social media platforms in Iraq. Politicians and activists accused U.S. occupation forces of killing the girl while training in a nearby camp. The bullet ended the life of the young woman Zainab as a result of a gunshot wound that came from a military shooting range near the village of Bu Alwan in Abu Ghraib district. For its part, the Baghdad Operations Command decided to open an investigation into the death of the teenage girl. The Iraqi security media cell said in a statement that the competent authorities supervising the course of this investigation will announce to public opinion its reasons and will take the necessary legal measures against anyone who is proven to be involved in this incident. Iraqi politicians and bloggers accused the U.S. occupation forces of killing Zainab, and one of the most prominent tweets on that matter was attributed to the Secretary General of Asa'ib Ahlul Haq, Qais al-Khazali, who demanded an immediate investigation into the killing of the girl. the hashtag America Killed Zainab became trending, and this came based on the testimony of the people of the region in a video clip circulating on social media platforms that the bullet came from a training camp inside Baghdad International Airport, in reference to the American Victoria occupation base located inside the airport. The martyrdom of the Iraqi girl Zainab, shot by the American occupation forces in Baghdad, does not seem to be passing unnoticed inside Iraq. The public are demanding government agencies investigate the cowardly, treacherous incident that affected Iraqi families in the village of Al Bu'alwan in the Abu Ghraib area. Meanwhile, Iraqis were not the slightest surprised that the Western mainstream media remained silent about this crime while it is dancing non-stop to the tune of regime change in Iran. Western and regional media hypocrisy does not surprise any of the natives of West Asia, those who are with one-eyed humanity. How many times have we seen them rising up for shenanigans under the pretext of human rights and keeping silent about the massacres of the occupation, be it the American or the Zionist occupation? The silence of the media, activists, and politicians who were tweeting round the clock attempting to incite civil war in Iran not so long ago are nothing less than partners in crime to the repetitive crimes of the American occupation, not only in Iraq, but across all the world. To discuss this tragedy with us from Beirut is Julia Qasim, journalist and political commentator. Thank you very much for being with us, Julia. Now, if you want to know how Zainab died, by browsing the news, we will often read this specific piece of information. It says, a stray bullet ended the life of young Zainab as a result of a gunshot wound coming from a military shooting range near the village of Al Bu'alwan. A gunshot wound originating from a military shooting range. This is what it said. This means that the killer is known or the suspect is well defined, but the news is incomplete and is not clear from an editorial point of view, at least, to say. Military shooting range belonging to whom? Does a stray bullet, Julia, take responsibility instead of a shooter?
You answered the question yourself, Marwa. The military range shooting was, the language for that is intentionally obscured because it is a site of the U.S. occupation, which is illegally in Iraq, which is illegally established its presence in Iraq decades ago and refuses to leave despite the will of the Iraqis. So while the media can obfuscate the accountability and the responsibility by trying to claim that a stray bullet did not intentionally kill Zainab Aissam, it still is indicative when the mask of the language is uncovered that that the U.S. occupation is accountable for this action, just as it is accountable for the deaths of millions in Iraq. The language of collateral damage that was employed by the imperialist leadership that justified the war crimes that took place in Iraq also could have been obfuscated to signify that, the deaths of millions of Iraqis and of countless civilians, children, women, did constitute a non-intentional attack, but nonetheless it was the direct result of an illegal occupation that involved brutal force against a civilian population, and this is no different.
Well, so a 15-year-old Iraqi teenager, her name is Zainab Aissam al-Khazali. She was killed by a stray bullet in her own father's field, yet people might not have even heard of her name before even watching this show right now, or the events that actually led to her murder, because international media, they did not only black out on the story, they were busy broadcasting regime change propaganda against the Islamic Republic of Iran. How do you assess the hypocrisy of the media, especially in a case like this one, a clear-cut case?
Right, and it's absolutely necessary that Zainab Aissam's name in her case is obscured, so that while the media is propagating the narrative of the evil Iranian regime that is just brutalizing women and is directly responsible for the death of Mahsa Amini, which anybody has access to the footage. It was widely broadcasted. It's available. available. It clearly shows that there was no evidence of beating. But that narrative had to take precedent in order to justify the imperialist feminist push to again demonize Iran and launch this narrative as in attempts to launch another soft war, color revolution campaign. And to have this occur simultaneously with the death of Zainab Aissam, it's not possible because people had to, the consent for imperialism had to be manufactured. So to have these stories heard and broadcasted simultaneously would present a contradiction in the imperialist narrative that would also that would hold the U.S. accountable for for the death of Zainab Khalil, but at the same time wants to hone in on focusing on holding manufacturing a narrative around the Iranian government of its supposed legitimacy and its brutality, particularly against women, which is a very, very common and recurring trope in U.S. propaganda and Western propaganda against Iran. And again, in one case, it was very obvious who were the culprits of the killing of Zainab Aissam were. But in the second case, the putting the Iranian government to blame and the Iranian officer and manufacturing this narrative of brutality was construed. It was obviously a narrative pushed without an absence of evidence. Mm-hmm. Now, whether it was the case that she died in police custody or was affected by distress due to her
chronic disease, she had chronic disease before.
Right. Right.
So that's basically, the fingers of accusations are directed in Iraq against the occupation forces, the American occupation forces, unlike what they are propagating about Ms. Mahsa Amini in Tehran. But they did not provide a justification or an explanation for what they did to Zainab al-Khazali. Although Iraqi politicians and bloggers accused the American forces of killing Zainab, and they demanded an investigation of this murder that happened, but no country denounced, nor was the voice of the United States of America heard, nor did the United Nations portray its concern that it usually portrays against anything that's going on in West Asia, or any of the Western countries even heard about Zainab. I know it's not a matter of geography here, rather of interest and of responsibility. But will Iraq be able to hold those responsible accountable to the murder, to the treacherous and coward crime that they committed against a young 15-year-old Iraqi teenager?
Right, and just to finish up the last point, the Iranian government is constantly demanded to hold itself accountable in the context of its constant demonization, despite actually an investigation being ordered by the president and the security carrying it out right away. And in the case of Iraq, while there has been an investigation demanded, the U.S. first of all wants to maintain its impunity in its role in causing countless Iraqi deaths, including this one, which is no different. But the U.S.'s continued intervention into Iraq also keeps there from being a government that's able to hold it accountable. In 2019, the resistance forces in Iraq, which represented a significant segment of the elected body, we're trying to form and consolidate a government that would be able to hold the U.S. accountable and remove the U.S. out of Iraq. But of course, the U.S. came in and incited a color revolution in Iraq that was designed to prevent that from happening. And we're seeing the effects of that right now, of how justice and accountability cannot be attained for Zainab Aissa. The U.S. wants to retain its impunity in the countless deaths around the world, intentional deaths that it caused. And this is, Amini's death is a convenient way for it to deflect responsibility and push a narrative that further obscures its role in actually imposing its occupation, its will, its hegemony around the world intentionally and through systematic violence and force.
But this is why we are here, Julia. We are here to make the world listen and hear our voices and know that a young Iraqi girl named Zainab Isam al-Khazali, she was killed, brutally killed by a bullet from a military base, an illegal military base inside of the sovereign Iraqi state and international airport. Julia Qasim, journalist and political commentator, I want to thank you very much for your contribution and for helping us raise the voices of those who are voiceless and who are oppressed because of the occupation and the presence of imperialist powers in our nations and killing us, the natives of West Asia. I want to thank you very much for being with us. Now please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideast Stream.